victory. In honor of Mother's Day, we're going to be looking at some amazing mothers who were in the Bible. And we're going to begin at 1 Samuel with a mother we just saw in the kids' video, Hannah. Now, as the cartoon said, Hannah was not able to have children, but it was more than this fact that made her so sad. Her husband, Elkanah, actually had two wives, Hannah and Peninnah. Now, Peninnah was able to have children and used that against Hannah. 1 Samuel 1, verses 6 and 7 says, "And because the Lord had closed her womb, her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. This went on year after year. Whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival provoked her till she wept and would not eat." Now, first of all, we don't know that God intentionally keeps women from having children. That phrase that's often used in the Bible, God closed her womb, it just seems to be just the way that the writers understood what was happening. There was no evidence of some kind of punishment by God. The Bible mentions the two wives not as friends, but as rivals. It seems as though they felt in competition for the love of Elkanah. The story goes on, and no one seems to understand what Hannah is going through. Her husband tries to comfort her, but falls short as he does nothing to stop Peninnah from the taunting of Hannah. As Hannah is crying and praying, the priest, Eli, thinks she's drunk and tells her to get rid of her wine. Hannah does not let how others see her keep her from going to God, though. She knows he will understand, and she stays faithful to prayer. Not only that, but she shows an understanding of sacrifice. 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 11, it says, "And she made a vow, saying, O Lord Almighty, if you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head." Now, this last part refers to a special vow made to God called the Nazirite vow. It was the same vow Samson's mother had taken, and it was to dedicate a person as holy unto God, separated for his special purpose. After this time of prayer, Eli the priest blesses Hannah, and her face is no longer downcast. Apparently, the burden had been lifted from her because she gave it to God, and she trusted him. Hannah was truly a woman of great faith, and God blessed her with her first son. Hannah was faithful to her promise and gave Samuel to be in the service of Eli the priest, not knowing if she would ever conceive another child. That is a mother who understands sacrifice. But God did bless her with more children after Samuel, 3 sons and 2 daughters. Hannah also got to see Samuel every year when the family went to worship, and Samuel grew up to be one of Israel's greatest prophets and leaders who personally anointed their greatest king, David. All thanks to the faithfulness and sacrifice of a mother. The next mother we'll talk about is found in 1 Kings. Well, the Bible doesn't give her name, but we know that she was a widow and had only one son. The prophet Elijah had just declared to the king of Israel that it would not rain for over 3 years because of the sins of Israel. When the drought was in full swing, Elijah was told by God to go to a place called Zarephath, which was right in the middle of a territory that worshipped the false god, Baal. God said in 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 9, I have commanded a widow in that place to supply you with food. Now, the Bible doesn't say how God commanded or communicated to the widow. We just know that he prepared the way for Elijah. And when Elijah sees the widow, he asks her for some water and a piece of bread. Now, keep in mind, this was during a severe drought. And this is the answer the widow gave him in 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 12. As surely as the Lord your God lives, I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. I'm gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die. So here was a mother who was literally going to cook what would be her last meal with her son. Things were hopeless for them, to say the least. From her statement, as the Lord your God lives, it says that she either recognized Elijah as an Israelite or that she was a God-fearing woman herself. In light of her hopeless situation, it's amazing what Elijah asks next. 1 Kings chapter 17, verses 13 to 14. Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said. But first make a small cake of bread for me from what you have, and bring it to me. And then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry, until the day the Lord gives rain on the land." Now imagine someone asking that of a mother. I know you only have enough food for you and your son, but go get me some first, please. It's a good thing that this didn't take place in modern America, because Elijah would have gotten an earful, I'm sure. But the widow now recognized Elijah as a man of God. Not just any God, but the God of Israel. So the region of Zarephath was on the Mediterranean coast, just north of Israel. And I'm sure many stories had reached this area about the God of Israel. So the widow now had a choice. Would she put her faith in this God that she had heard so many miraculous things about? Even more, would she put the life of her only son on the line? Now, once again, we see a mother who knew the meaning of sacrifice. If the God of Elijah came through, she and her son would live through the drought. I'm sure that when she went home, her son probably thought she was crazy for carrying their last loaf of bread out to a stranger. I'm sure he probably had a lot of things to say. "What are you, crazy? That's our last loaf of bread. We don't even know this guy." Sometimes as children, we have to trust our mother's instincts. God blessed the widow's faith and her sacrifice. In 1 Kings 17, verses 15 to 16, it says, "She went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. For the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah." In both stories that we just went over, a mother was presented with a desperate situation. But when faced with what to do, they put their trust in God, even when it required sacrifice, and God blessed them. There are many different types of mothers in this world. Not all are able to rise to this ideal. But when you see one like this, it's truly a blessing. A mother like Hannah and the widow will make whatever sacrifice is necessary for the well-being of their children. No matter what happens in their lives, their faith is also unshakable. I know that when I say this, I'm probably going to make my mother cry, but I want to mention this as we go through these stories. My mother was truly a woman who sacrificed. She knew how to do that. She there were times where we were by ourselves, or my mom was divorced, and I remember growing up and her working 2 jobs just to put food on the table. We'd see her for dinner time, and then she'd be right back out. So she knew the meaning of sacrifice, even at the expense of her own health. And she would always make sure that we would be plugged in somewhere to a church, and her faith was always very rooted and very strong. And I am very, very thankful to God that we were able to have that type of mother in our lives. But we can't talk about mothers who are faithful and understand sacrifice without bringing up Mary, the mother of Jesus. Not to diminish Joseph's role in the life of Jesus, but maybe we'll cover him at Father's Day. But Mary probably had to have a stronger faith than any mother in the Bible, perhaps even in history. She had to believe that she was, first of all, going to have a child when she was still a virgin. Second, she was just an average girl who would give birth to royalty. Third, her child would be the Son of God. It's probably a good thing that the angel Gabriel told her these things, because that's a lot to take in. I mean, if you want to be sure messages from God, one of the chief angels delivering it personally would add a lot of validity that you would want. Still, how many people would have answered as she did? May it be done to me as you have said. For being a young mother, Mary also showed a tremendous amount of endurance and strength. She had to go away from home right when she was about to give birth, have her child in a stable, flee to a strange place she had never been before in fear for her son's life, and then relocate again to Nazareth, all within a very short span of time. But this was all a part of the sacrifice that she agreed to when she said, "May it be done to me as you have said." Mary would sacrifice more than she could have ever imagined, but she never lost her faith. I wonder how Mary reacted to the critics of Jesus. If she was a mama bear type of mother, I'm sure she took issue with the people criticizing. I'm sure maybe she would have said things like, well, you know what? When you make a deaf person hear, then you can criticize him. I wonder if there was even a time when she wanted Jesus to tone things down. Maybe she was worried about him getting hurt. Jesus, can you just tone down the Messiah rhetoric? Maybe just go out and say nice things to people. But we do know that Mary never told Jesus to stop what he was doing. She knew that Jesus had a mission, and she never questioned it. How hard it must have been for a strong woman of faith who trusted God with the life of her firstborn to see the suffering that Jesus had to endure. There's a scene in the movie The Passion of the Christ that always gets me, and we don't know if this was actually what Mary thought, but it's kind of just a wondering of her putting the pieces together. She's watching Jesus carry the cross, and at one point when he falls from exhaustion, it flashes back to a time where she's watching Jesus as a young child falling and hurting his knee, and she runs to him. And in the movie, as she's an adult, she also runs to him, and it kind of ties those together. How mothers sometimes see even their adult children as their little child. And we, like I said, we don't know if that happened, but it kind of puts into perspective that she was truly a mother, and she was watching her son go through this suffering. But Mary showed her strength and devotion by never leaving Jesus' side, even when all of his disciples, except John, deserted him. But she was rewarded for her faithfulness because she got there to see Jesus resurrected. I can't possibly imagine what kind of eternal reward that she received for her role in God's plan. To all those mothers who are watching today, we say thank you. Thank you for believing in us. Thank you for loving us. And thank you for being you. Would you pray with me, please?